My wife stood up at our 30th wedding anniversary dinner, lifted a glass of champagne I had paid for, looked around a room full of our family, and said, "I'd like to make a toast to the 30 years I wasted with this fool. I'm leaving tonight, with Marcus." The room laughed. Then the room clapped. Not all of it, but enough. My brother-in-law whistled. My sister, who I'd put through community college 28 years ago, raised her glass and said, "About time, Geraldine." My own son, 26 years old, a man who I'd taught to ride a bicycle and shave and write a check. He set his glass down and looked at the floor, but he didn't speak. I sat at the head of the table I'd reserved at the Lakeside Pavilion in Lewistown, Pennsylvania, and I watched my wife of 3 decades raise her glass in the air and the room respond like a chorus rehearsed. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I held my own glass. Sparkling water, no champagne, never had a taste for it, and I let the moment land where it was meant to land. Then I smiled. Not the wounded smile of a man being publicly humiliated, the other kind. The smile of a man who had hired a private investigator 6 months ago and who knew with absolute certainty that the Marcus my wife was leaving with tonight was not the man she thought he was. She looked at me across the long table. She expected to see something break in my face. A flinch, a flush. The crumpling of pride that would give her toast its full theatrical payoff. Instead, what she saw was a man drinking sparkling water and smiling at her the way you smile at a child who has just confidently presented you with a drawing of something they cannot possibly understand. Her smile flickered, just for a half-second. The kind of flicker you only catch if you've been married to someone for 30 years and you know every micro-expression in their face the way a sailor knows weather. Before I tell you what happened in the next 10 minutes, how a 58-year-old logistics company owner from central Pennsylvania let his wife walk into a trap she had built with her own hands, I want to offer a gentle reminder. Some elements of this story have been dramatized for the telling, but the lessons about family, respect, and the weight of our choices remain deeply real. Betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes the hand that lifts the toast against you is the same hand you held when your father died, when your son was born, when your business almost failed and got back up again. And before we go further, tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. What city, what country, what time it is where you are. It helps this channel reach more people who need to hear stories like this one, and it reminds me that even in the loudest, ugliest moments, none of us are sitting alone at the table. My name is Walter Hennessy. I'm 58 years old. I live in a town called Belleville in central Pennsylvania, in the long green valley that runs between Jack's Mountain and Stone Mountain, the kind of country where the roads follow creek beds and the barns have been standing since before electricity reached them. I own a regional logistics company called Hennessy Freight and Distribution. We run 31 trucks across 4 states, handling shipments for agricultural suppliers, lumber yards, and a couple of medical equipment manufacturers up near State College. I built it from one truck, a used 1992 Peterbilt with a cracked windshield I bought at auction for $19,000 when I was 28 years old. I drove it myself for the first 3 years, sometimes 18 hours a day, sleeping in the cab at rest stops, eating gas station sandwiches that tasted like the plastic they came in. Geraldine packed me coffee in a thermos in those days. I remember that thermos, green, dented, with my initials in white paint on the bottom because she was worried I'd lose it. I still have that thermos. It's on a shelf in my office at the depot. I look at it sometimes the way other men look at old wedding photographs. We married when I was 28 and she was 26. Small ceremony at her parents' farm outside Reedsville. Her father slaughtered a hog for the reception. Her mother cried during the vows. My own parents had passed by then, My father from a heart attack on the floor of the machine shop where he worked, my mother from grief 18 months later. And so it was Geraldine's family that became mine, the way these things happen when you marry into a place where roots run deep and the names on the mailboxes haven't changed in 4 generations. I want to tell you about Geraldine the way I knew her in the early years, because the story doesn't make sense unless you understand that I loved her. I loved her with the steady, quiet conviction of a man who didn't have many people left in the world and who believed that marriage was a kind of architecture, something you built carefully, board by board, and then you stood inside it and made it home. She was sharp, funny in a dry, cutting way that took people a minute to catch. She kept the books for the first 8 years of the company, and she was better at it than any accountant I ever hired afterward. When the bank turned us down for our first expansion loan in 1996, it was Geraldine who walked into the loan officer's office in a thrifted blazer with a binder full of route projections and walked out with a letter of approval. She believed in what we were building. She believed in me. And for a long time, 20 years, maybe longer, we built side by side the way 2 people are supposed to. Our son, Caleb, was born in 1998. He grew up in the cab of my Peterbilt during summers, his car seat strapped into the passenger side, his small hands holding a juice box while we ran loads up to Williamsport and back. He learned to read off the names of the towns on the highway signs. Geraldine used to laugh and say he was going to grow up thinking the whole world was a long stretch of asphalt and a CB radio. He grew up. He went to Penn State. He got a degree in finance and a job at a regional bank in Harrisburg. He married a girl named Tiffany, whose parents owned a restaurant in Hershey, and they had a baby last year, a little girl named Emerson, who has Geraldine's eyes and my hands. The first time I held her, I thought, this is what it was all for. The trucks, the 18-hour days, the thermos with the white-painted initials. All of it leads to this small person who will never have to know how cold that cab was in February. That was 11 months before the night of the anniversary dinner. The changes in Geraldine started about a year ago. Slowly at first, the way bad weather builds. A shift in the air pressure, a thinning of the light, nothing you can name out loud. She started spending more time on her phone. She bought a new wardrobe. Clothes that didn't suit a woman in her mid-50s living in a Pennsylvania farming town. Clothes that suggested somewhere else and someone else. She joined a gym in State College, 40 minutes from our house, and she went 4 times a week. I noticed. I'm not the kind of man who misses things. 29 years of running a logistics company teaches you to read patterns. You learn to spot the truck that's burning fuel inefficiently before it breaks down. You learn to hear the engine noise that doesn't belong. And I was hearing it now, in my own house, in the small percussion of a marriage I had assumed was solid because I had built it solid. The first thing I did was nothing. That's important. I want you to understand that I didn't react. I didn't accuse. I didn't search her phone. I just watched and listened the way you watch a load before you secure it, the way you listen to an engine before you sign off on a job. Pattern recognition. The patterns were not subtle once I started looking. She stopped wearing her wedding ring around the house. She said the prongs were loose, and she was afraid of losing the diamond. I offered to take it to the jeweler in Lewistown myself. She said she'd already done it. She hadn't. I drove to the jeweler the following week on an unrelated errand and asked, casually, whether they'd seen Mrs. Hennessy recently. The owner, a man named Bill Tarduno, who I'd known for 20 years, said he hadn't seen her in over a year. She started taking cash withdrawals from our joint account in amounts just under the reporting threshold, $300 here, $400 there, spread across 3 different ATMs in Mifflin County. I'm not a forensic accountant, but I read the statements every month. I always have. The withdrawals didn't add up to anything she'd ever spent money on in 30 years. She came home one Tuesday evening with a faint scratch on the back of her neck, the kind of mark that doesn't come from anything ordinary. When I asked about it, she said she'd brushed against a tree branch in the parking lot at the gym. There are no trees in the parking lot at the gym. I drove past it the next morning to check. Just blacktop and parking spaces and a metal sign. Each lie was small, each lie was easily explained away, but together they formed a shape, and I had spent 30 years training my eyes to see shapes that other people missed, so I did what I always do when something doesn't add up. I documented it. I started a notebook, a small black moleskin I kept in the locked drawer of my office at the depot. I wrote down dates, times, the exact phrases she used, the cash withdrawal amounts, the mileage on her car when she left and when she returned. Not because I planned to confront her with it, because I needed the truth to be visible to myself before I could decide what to do about it. After 3 months of documentation, I knew. I didn't have proof, but I knew. And there's a difference between knowing and being able to do anything about it, and the difference is a profession that has existed for as long as marriages have existed. So I picked up the phone and I called a man named Marcus Bellamy. Marcus runs a small private investigation firm out of an office above a hardware store in Harrisburg. I'd met him 8 years ago when I needed background work done on a potential business partner who turned out, thanks to Marcus, to be exactly the kind of man you don't want to be in business with. Marcus is 52, ex-military police, the kind of man who looks you in the eye when he shakes your hand and remembers what you ordered for lunch 6 months later. He doesn't talk much. When he does, every word has been weighed. I drove to Harrisburg on a Thursday afternoon in March. I sat across his desk in an office that smelled like old paper and coffee that had been brewing for too long. I told him what I'd been seeing. I showed him the notebook. Marcus read the notebook from front to back without speaking. When he finished, he closed it and set it on the desk between us. "Walter," he said, "I can confirm what you already know. Or I can confirm something better." "What's better?" I asked. He leaned back in his chair. The chair creaked. The afternoon sun came through the blinds in long horizontal stripes across his desk, the kind of light that made the room feel like a film noir. "I can get inside it," he said. "With your permission, I can become the man she's looking for. And I can document every conversation, every meeting, every plan she makes, in a way that will hold up in any court in this state or any other." I sat with that for a moment. The fluorescent light buzzed. Outside, on the sidewalk 3 stories below, a delivery truck idled. I knew the sound. I'd built a company on that sound. "What does that look like?" I asked. "It looks like I create a profile," he said. "Slowly, naturally. I show up in places she frequents, the gym in State College, the coffee shop she stops at every Tuesday. I let her notice me. I let her make the first move, which she will, because women in her situation always do. They're looking for an exit, and any door that opens looks like the right one. I never pursue her. I let her pursue me. That keeps the documentation clean. Every interaction is initiated by her, on record, with no question of entrapment." "And then?" I asked. "Then I let her tell me everything," he said. "Her plans for the marriage, the money, the house, the timeline. Women in this situation talk, Walter. They talk because they think they've found someone who finally understands them. They talk because the secret is too heavy to carry alone, and every word will be recorded. Legally in this state, with one-party consent, which means me. Every recording will hold up." I thought about Geraldine, about the woman who'd packed coffee in a green thermos at 5 in the morning because she didn't want me to be cold, about the mother who'd held our son in the hospital and said, "We're going to give him everything," about the partner who'd walked into a bank in a thrifted blazer and refused to leave without a yes. That woman was gone. I had been mourning her for months without naming the grief. "Do it," I said. Marcus nodded. "One condition. You don't contact me unless I contact you. You don't change your behavior at home. You don't ask questions you wouldn't have asked 6 months ago. You become a man who suspects nothing. Can you do that?" I looked at him across the desk. "I'm a man who runs a logistics company," I said. "I move things across the country without being noticed. I can be invisible in my own house." He almost smiled. "Good." I drove back to Belleville that evening through the long Pennsylvania twilight. The Susquehanna ran silver alongside Route 322 for 40 miles. I rolled the window down and let the cold March air come into the cab, and I made myself a promise that I kept for the next 6 months. I would not let Geraldine see anything in my face that she had not seen in it for the previous 29 years. I kept that promise. I asked her about her day at dinner. I kissed her cheek when I left for work in the morning. I held her hand during the closing credits of the Sunday night movie we'd watched together for 2 decades, even as I knew her thumb was running across my knuckles while her mind was somewhere else, with someone else, planning something else. That was the hardest 6 months of my life, not because I was angry, because I wasn't allowed to be. Marcus called me 3 weeks after our meeting. She'd noticed him at the coffee shop in State College. She'd struck up a conversation. He'd been polite, distant, mildly mysterious, exactly the persona he'd designed. She'd given him her number unprompted. He called again 2 weeks later. They'd had lunch. She'd told him she was in an unhappy marriage to a man who didn't understand her, who was married to his trucks more than to her, who'd never given her the life she deserved. Marcus had nodded sympathetically and recorded every word. He called a month after that. They'd been to a hotel in Carlisle. She'd told him about the joint accounts, the house, the business. She'd asked him whether he thought she could get half of everything. He'd said he didn't know. She should consult an attorney. She'd said she already had. Have you ever had to wear a smile so steady it stopped feeling like your own face? Have you ever had to kiss someone good morning while knowing exactly what they'd said about you in a hotel room the night before? If you've lived inside that particular silence, tell me about it in the comments. I want to know you're out there. By month 4, Marcus had over 40 hours of recordings. By month 5, he had photographs, hotel receipts, bank statements. She didn't know he'd helped her photocopy for her divorce attorney. By month 6, 3 weeks before our anniversary dinner, Marcus had something I hadn't expected. She had a plan, and the plan included a date. "Walter," he said over the phone, his voice low and even, "she's planning to leave you publicly," her exact words. "She wants to humiliate you in front of your family at the anniversary dinner. She thinks if she does it that way, with witnesses, with everyone watching, it puts her in a stronger position emotionally. People will rally around her. The narrative will be set before you can defend yourself." I held the phone to my ear and looked out the window of my office at the depot. A truck was backing into the loading bay. The reverse alarm beeped steadily, the way reverse alarms do, indifferent to anything happening inside the men who hear them. "When?" I asked. "The dinner," Marcus said. "She's going to make a toast. She's going to announce that she's leaving with me. She's been telling her sister and her friends for 2 weeks. Walter, she thinks I'm going to be there." I closed my eyes. "Are you going to be there?" I asked. "That's up to you," Marcus said. I sat in my office for a long time after we hung up. The afternoon light moved across the floor. The phone rang once, and I let it go to voicemail. A trucker named Earl knocked on my door and asked about a shipment to Erie, and I told him the answer without remembering having said it. Then I called my attorney. A man named Howell Pruitt, semi-retired, the lawyer who'd handled every contract Hennessy Freight and Distribution had ever signed. Howell was 71 years old, walked with a cane, and had the legal mind of a steel trap that had never rusted. "Howell," I said, "I need to set up an irrevocable trust, quietly, with everything in it. The company, the house, the accounts, the equipment, the depot property, the cabin in the Poconos, everything. And I need it done before May 14th. Howell didn't ask why. Howell never asked why. He asked how. And we spent the next 3 weeks moving every asset I owned into a structure that no court in Pennsylvania could touch. The trust named Caleb as a contingent beneficiary, a charitable foundation as the secondary, and me as the lifetime income recipient. Geraldine's name appeared nowhere on any of the documents. Not as a beneficiary, not as a trustee, not as a contingent anything. 3 days before the anniversary dinner, Howell called me into his office. He set the final paperwork on the desk between us. "This is signed and recorded," he said. "As of yesterday, you don't personally own anything. The trust owns everything. You're the income beneficiary. She has no legal claim to a single asset because none of the assets are technically yours anymore. Anything she tries to attach in a divorce, the trust simply blocks. It's airtight. I'd stake my career on it." "You already have," I said. He smiled, the way Howell smiles, which is barely. "What's your plan for the dinner?" he asked. I told him. He thought about it for a long moment. Then he said, "I'd like to be there." "You're invited," I said, "as a family friend. Bring your wife." Howell nodded once. "I'll bring the papers too, the divorce filing, the trust documentation, and a notarized statement of the recordings Marcus has provided. If you decide you want them served at the dinner, they'll be ready." I appreciated that. There was a time in my life when I thought lawyers were just men in suits who charged too much. I have, in the years since, come to understand that a good lawyer is a kind of structural engineer for the soul. They make sure the building doesn't fall down when the storm comes, even if the storm is your own family. The night of the dinner arrived warm for May. I drove to the lakeside pavilion in my work truck, not the newer Ford I usually took to nice places, but my older one, the one with the dent in the tailgate and the company logo fading on the door. I wore a clean button-down shirt and pressed jeans and the leather belt my father had given me when I turned 18. I wanted to be exactly who I was. I had nothing left to perform. Geraldine was already there when I arrived. She was wearing a cream-colored dress I'd never seen before. Her hair was done in a way it hadn't been done in years. She greeted me at the door of the private dining room with a kiss on the cheek and a smile that almost made me forget what I knew. That's the cruelty of the long con. It teaches you that the people you trust can perform love so well that you start to believe them again, even when you have evidence in writing. The room filled. My sister Joelle and her husband Russell. Caleb and Tiffany, with little Emerson asleep against Tiffany's shoulder. Geraldine's brother Dwight, who I'd never liked. 2 of Geraldine's friends from the gym in State College, women I'd met perhaps 3 times. Howell Pruitt and his wife Eleanor, who Geraldine assumed were just an older couple I knew from somewhere. And, taking his seat near the back of the room with the quiet courtesy of a man who'd been invited at the last minute, Marcus Bellamy. Marcus and I had not made eye contact when he came in. We did not need to. He took his place at the table and unfolded his napkin and waited. Geraldine saw him, and her face did something complicated. Surprise, then suppressed delight, then a flicker of confusion at how he'd come to be here. He gave her a small, neutral nod, the nod of a stranger acknowledging a hostess at a party, and went back to studying the menu. She turned to me. "Who's that?" she asked casually. "A consultant who's been doing some work for the company," I said. "He helped us out of a jam last quarter. I wanted to thank him." "Oh," she said. "That's nice of you." She smiled at me. I smiled back. The performance had reached its final act, and neither of us could break character now, even if we'd wanted to. The dinner proceeded. Salads, bread, conversations about Caleb's job and the baby and the weather, and the endless dull machinery of small talk among people who barely knew each other. Geraldine drank 2 glasses of wine, then a third. By the time the entrees were cleared, her cheeks were flushed, and her eyes had taken on a particular glitter that I had come to recognize over the past 6 months. The look of a woman who was about to do something she had been rehearsing in her head for weeks. She tapped her glass with a knife. The room quieted. "I'd like to make a toast," she said. I lifted my own glass. Sparkling water. Steady hand. She stood up. She looked around the room with the slow, satisfied gaze of a woman who believed she was finally about to be seen the way she deserved to be seen. "To 30 years of marriage," she said. "To 3 decades of putting up with a man who never noticed me, who married his trucks instead of his wife, who wouldn't know a real conversation if it ran him over on Route 322. A few uncomfortable laughs. My sister Joelle laughed loudest. I made a note of that. "I'm done," Geraldine continued. "I've wasted enough of my life on this fool. And tonight I'm leaving with Marcus." She raised her glass higher. She turned and gestured at the back of the room, and now the room reacted the way I had been told it would react. Joelle gasped, then clapped. Russell whistled. Dwight raised his glass and shouted, "About time!" Geraldine's gym friends began applauding. Caleb sat very still and looked at the floor. Tiffany covered Emerson's ear with her hand. I sat at the head of the table and held my own glass and waited for the applause to subside. When it did, I stood up. The room turned to me. Geraldine's smile was wide and victorious. She thought I was about to crumble in front of everyone, that she was about to receive the public collapse she had imagined for weeks. I lifted my glass. "To my wife of 30 years, I said. The room went very quiet, the way rooms do when they sense a register shift. "I'd like to thank her for her toast. It was a remarkable speech, honest in its way. And I'd like to add to it before she leaves." I turned to the back of the room. "Marcus," I said, "would you mind standing up?" Marcus stood, slowly. He buttoned his jacket. He looked at Geraldine across the table, and for the first time all night he let his face be his real face. Not the warm, mysterious stranger from the coffee shop in State College, the other man, the one he had been the entire time, the investigator, the professional, the one who had been recording every word. Geraldine's smile froze. "Marcus," I said, "would you confirm for the room how long we've known each other?" 6 months and 3 weeks, Marcus said. His voice carried easily through the silent room. "Mr. Hennessy hired me on March 14th to investigate his wife's behavior. I have been working under his direction since then." The silence in the room changed texture. It went from anticipatory to airless. Joelle's mouth opened. Russell set down his glass without finishing the motion. Dwight's hand froze in the air. Caleb lifted his head. Geraldine was still standing. She had not yet sat down. Her glass was still raised. "Marcus," I said, "could you tell the room what you have documented over the past 6 months?" 43 hours of audio recordings, Marcus said, pulling a slim folder from inside his jacket. 11 separate meetings at various locations in central Pennsylvania, 19 photographs, receipts from 4 hotels, bank statements documenting cash withdrawals from Mr. Hennessy's joint account, totaling $11,400, and a recorded conversation dated April 19th, in which Mrs. Hennessy outlined her plan to publicly humiliate her husband at this anniversary dinner in order to strengthen her position in divorce proceedings she had not yet filed. He let those words sit. Geraldine's glass began to tremble, slowly at first, then more. The champagne inside it caught the light and made small, shimmering circles on the white tablecloth. "That's not," she said. "That's not. Marcus, what are you doing?" "My job, Mrs. Hennessy," Marcus said. "The job your husband hired me to do." Howell Pruitt stood up at his end of the table. He was the oldest man in the room, and he stood the way old men stand when they have something important to do. Slowly, deliberately, with the dignity of a man who had been waiting his entire career for a single moment and had finally arrived at it. He picked up a thick manila envelope from beside his plate. "Mrs. Hennessy," Howell said, his voice carrying the gentle, terrible authority of a man who had practiced law for 46 years. "My name is Howell Pruitt. I am Walter's attorney. I have here a petition for divorce filed 3 days ago in Mifflin County, along with documentation of an irrevocable trust into which all of Walter's assets, the house, the company, the accounts, the equipment, the property, were transferred prior to your discovery. Your name is not on any of these documents. You are being served tonight in front of these witnesses in accordance with Pennsylvania law." He walked the length of the table. He held out the envelope. Geraldine did not take it. He set it on her plate. The room had become so quiet I could hear Emerson breathing in Tiffany's arms. Geraldine looked at the envelope. She looked at Marcus. She looked at me. The expression on her face went through 3 stages in the space of about 4 seconds: confusion, calculation, and then the slow, awful arrival of the truth, the way a tide arrives at a shore that has been waiting for it for hours without knowing. "You," she said to me. Her voice had lost its volume entirely. "You knew." "For 6 months," I said. "I knew before you knew you'd decided." I sat back down. I picked up my glass of sparkling water. I took a sip. Then I said, "The only thing left to say. You are welcome to leave with Marcus tonight. You should know that Marcus is going home to his wife in Harrisburg, who he's been married to for 19 years. You will not be going with him. You will be going wherever a person goes when they have just discovered that the life they were planning to live tomorrow does not exist." The room did not applaud. The room did not move. Geraldine sat down very slowly into her chair. Her hand was still on the glass. The glass was still on the table. Her face had gone the color of paper. Joelle, my sister, looked at me. "Walter," she started. I held up my hand. "I love you, Joelle," I said. "But you applauded a few minutes ago. So did Russell. So did Dwight. I want all of you to remember the sound your hands made tonight. I want you to remember that you cheered when my wife told you I was a fool. I want you to remember it because someday, and I hope it's soon, one of you is going to need someone to defend you when you're not in the room. And when that day comes, I hope someone does it. I hope someone does for you what nobody at this table did for me tonight." I stood up. "Caleb," I said. My son lifted his head. His eyes were wet. "I love you. I'll see you Sunday." He nodded. He couldn't speak. I turned to Marcus. "Thank you," I said. Marcus inclined his head. I turned to Howell. "We'll talk Monday." "Monday," Howell said. I walked out of the lakeside pavilion alone. The May night was warm and full of frogs in the marsh by the parking lot. The lake reflected a half-moon and a single security light from the building. I got into my old work truck, the one with the dented tailgate and the fading logo. I started the engine. I sat for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel and listened to the diesel rumble in the dark. Then I drove home. The house was dark when I arrived. I went inside and turned on one lamp in the living room and sat in my chair, the one Geraldine had always called my work chair, the one I read the newspaper in every morning. The house was very quiet. After 30 years of marriage, the silence had a different texture than before. It was not lonely, it was clean. I thought about the green thermos with my initials painted on the bottom. I thought about Caleb in the cab of my Peterbilt at 4 years old, holding a juice box, learning to read off the highway signs. I thought about the woman Geraldine had been in 1996, walking into a bank in a thrifted blazer with a binder full of root projections, and I tried to find her somewhere in the woman who had stood up tonight and called me a fool. I couldn't. She had been gone for a long time, and I had been mourning her without permission to grieve. That was the loss. The wife I had actually had, the partner, the believer, the woman who packed coffee at 5 in the morning, had died somewhere along the way, and I hadn't been told. The woman at the dinner tonight was a stranger wearing my wife's body. The marriage I had been protecting all those years had not been a marriage in a long time. It had been a memory I refused to update. That's the part I want you to hear if you're listening to this. The most painful betrayals don't come from the moment you find out. They come from realizing how long you knew, how deep you'd buried the knowing, how much energy you spent every day refusing to look at what was already true. The divorce was finalized 8 months later. Geraldine fought it. Her attorney was good, not Howell good, but capable. The trust held, the recordings held, the documentation held. She received nothing from Hennessy Freight and Distribution because the company was no longer mine to give. She received nothing from the house because the house was held by the trust. She received the personal belongings she could pack into her car and a small alimony amount that the court determined based on the length of the marriage and the absence of any contribution to the assets in the past decade. She moved to Florida. I do not know what she does there. I do not ask. Caleb called me the night after the dinner. He was crying. He told me he had not known. He told me he should have spoken up at the table. He told me he was ashamed. I told him that shame was a useful tool only if it taught you something, and the lesson here was simple. When someone you love is being mocked in public, you stand up. You don't wait. You don't do the math. You stand up because that is what love is. Love isn't a feeling. Love is a posture. It's the angle of your spine when someone you care about is being attacked in front of a room. He said he understood. I believed him. He visits every Sunday with Tiffany and Emerson. The baby is walking now. She calls me Pop-Pop. It is the best sound I have ever heard. Joelle did not call me for 3 months. When she finally did, she apologized. I accepted the apology, but something between us is permanently changed. We are sister and brother in the way that two people are who once shared a childhood but can no longer share a table with the same trust. That's all right. Some structural damage doesn't get repaired. It just gets accommodated. Marcus and I still talk occasionally. He sends me a Christmas card every year. He never charges me for the time we spend on the phone, even though I always offer. I think he understands what he gave me. He didn't just give me evidence. He gave me the chance to stand up at my own anniversary dinner and not be the man my wife thought she was leaving. Hennessy Freight and Distribution is still running. 31 trucks, 48 employees. The same depot building I bought in 2003. I drive the older Ford to work most mornings. The thermos with my initials sits on the same shelf in my office. Sometimes I make coffee for myself in the depot kitchen and pour it into that thermos, the same green plastic, the same dent. And I take it out to the loading bay and watch the sun come up over the Pennsylvania ridges, and I think, this is what was mine. This was always mine. And no one, not a wife, not a sister, not a room full of people clapping at the wrong moment, could take it from me, because I had built it, and I had documented it, and I had protected it, and I had refused to let the people who underestimated me write the ending of my own life. If you're listening to this and you suspect that someone you love is planning to walk away from you with both hands full of things that belong to you, I want you to hear me. Don't argue. Don't accuse. Don't beg. Document. Watch. Hire the help you need. Build the structure that protects what you've built. And when the day comes that they think they're about to humiliate you in front of everyone you know, you will already have done the quiet, patient work of making sure their toast lands in an empty room. The applause they were expecting will not come, and the silence that replaces it will be the cleanest sound you've ever heard. Thank you for spending your time with us here at the Otis Archive. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice.